Hey everybody, Audrey here, and welcome to a special live edition of Trans Odyssey. Thank you for joining me tonight. It is July 1st, and summer's almost halfway over. Oh my gosh, terrible. Uh, the one thing I wanted to talk about with you tonight is transgender support. That's the topic of my live show tonight, and it is live, kind of unscripted. Anything could happen. You never know what's going to happen. There might be a cat show up. I'm just adjusting my computer here. If I see a cat, I'm going to scoop them up and I'm going to show you. So my fiance Emily is sitting in the background here, making sure everything is going okay. She's is it going okay? Give me a thumbs up. All right, we're all good to go there. Um, but I had a really rough week here. I had all these interviews and a lot of editing to do, and scrambling to get this all ready tonight. So I really appreciate you showing up and being part of this. Now, like I said, this is about transgender support, and I have a special guest tonight to talk with me about the importance of having a support network as you're transitioning from male to female. It's specifically for that, but it can also apply to female to male as well, because when you're transitioning, you kind of get a lonely feeling, and especially when you're just starting, and if you don't really have anyone there with you to help you along with that or to talk to, it can feel very lonely and depressing, and it could lead to just general health problems, mental problems down the road. So today I want to talk to a very special guest of mine. Her name is Caitlyn Strohmeyer. She took the time out of her day to sit down with me and talk about how important it is to find support, because she kind of went through the same thing I went through when we first started transitioning. Just was no one there to talk to, and I'm really, really lucky that I have my fiance, because she was with me through every step of the way, from the time that I was considering transitioning until now, and it's been almost 4 years, and she's still here. Thank you. But I wanted to introduce Caitlyn to you, and she's a very special person, very friendly, and this is actually the first time I actually talked to her face to face, although via Zoom. Hopefully someday I'll get to actually sit down with her and have some coffee, and we can talk about stuff. But she's a really wonderful person, and I hope you enjoy watching this interview with her. I'll be back. Now, I want to get straight to the point here. This is
Caitlyn
based on something that I
Strohmeyer
was
is a
told.
master-level social worker,
Is being
community advocate,
transgender
and a transgender
really
woman
against
living
the
in
will of God?
northwestern Pennsylvania.
I think
She
Jesus
works
had
as a
more
crisis
things to say about
clinician at
faithful people who had
UPMC
too many
Western
rules.
Behavioral Health at Safe Harbor. She began living her truth very publicly in 2010 and has since dedicated herself to the cause of LGBTQ equality and social justice for all marginalized communities, with a more recent focus on LGBTQ healthcare. Among other past and present roles, Caitlyn is founder and past president of TransFamily of Northwestern Pennsylvania, now serving as a board advisor. She also currently co-chairs the Erie County LGBTQ+ Coordinated Response Committee on Domestic Violence, sits on the board of Pennsylvania Equality Project, is an advisory committee member for the PA LGBTQ+ Healthcare Conference, planning committee member for the Erie County LGBTQ+ Healthcare Conference, and is a member of the Mayor's LGBTQ+ Advisory Council in Erie, Pennsylvania.
So joining me now is Caitlyn Strohmeyer. Caitlyn, welcome to Trans Odyssey. I'm really, really glad you're here today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here too.
Thank you so much for this.
You're actually one of the first people I talked to when I first transitioned. I had been referred to you by someone, and I just was asking you a lot of questions about what do I do, what kind of doctors can I see for HRT, and you were really helpful. You gave me a lot of advice and some resources to look into, and that really helped me.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm really glad I was able to get you started on that path and, in whatever way I could.
That's the whole point of today's video is finding support, because sometimes when we start to transition, we feel really alone, and we just don't know what to do. I mean, we know who we are, we know the true identity of who we are, but we don't know who to reach out to. And finding that support is really important. Now, you are the founder and former president of TransFamily of Northwestern Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
What was it that made you think about starting TransFamily? What were the circumstances that led you down that path?
I came out 10 years ago. It was 2009, late in 2009. And I had no one. I had no one to talk to, no one. I knew nobody in the community. I'd never been involved in the LGBTQ community at all. I did find a local group that got together monthly, but in looking at their website, it didn't feel right. I live in Erie, PA, so it's, not a big town, not a lot of resources. And I went there for a couple of years, but after about 6 months, I realized that I wasn't necessarily going for myself at all anymore. I wasn't going for the support for myself. I was going to help other people, to be there for them and to be able to share my story with them and help them see that, you're okay. You're not broken. You're beautiful. And there's other people like you, and we want to help you. So I did that for a while, and then I got thinking about, it's like, well, it'd be really great if we could have something like this in Erie. So I asked them, it's like, hey, is it okay if I take this model that you have here and maybe the TransFamily name and start a group in Erie? And they said, yeah, absolutely, go ahead.
Caitlyn, a lot of transgender individuals, when they first come out, they suffer loss of family support, sometimes friends, people that they thought would be there, and suddenly they're gone. And did that happen to you when you first transitioned, and how did it affect you?
It did. Maybe not to the extent that it happens to a lot of people. I've always said that I've been very blessed. When I first came out, I wrote a letter. I have 4 brothers that live all over the country, and it came down to me calling my brothers and talking to them on the phone. I also sent them copies of the letter that I wrote, and I really had high hopes that they would be on board, but they really weren't. I have one brother, the oldest, who has been my rock. He's just been there the whole time. He actually identifies as transgender himself. The other brothers, not so much. My parents were no longer with me, so I didn't have that to deal with. I know that's usually a difficult thing, but I like to think that my mother would have been okay with it. Maybe not right away.
Give to someone who lives out in the rural areas that feels like there's just nowhere to go. What advice could you give them?
Well, being an advocate, my first thought is build it. If you don't have it there, build it. That's what I try to do. So it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to stand up and say, hey, I'm starting a support group for the community. But the internet makes it a lot easier to connect to people. I wholeheartedly encourage, using social media. Zoom has become a part of our daily lives now.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure it's going to remain that way. So there are a lot of avenues that people can use to connect, but it's not the same, as that face to face. I mean, aside from starting your own thing, locally, there may be some travel involved, but the advocacy is so important. You have that ability to stand up and speak your truth publicly and get out there and meet the people who can make things happen. I've worked really hard over the years, to make inroads in different areas like healthcare, domestic violence, and HIV/AIDS, and just meeting people throughout the community that are in these organizations that are tending to those, just to have a transgender voice at the table.
Do you believe that in time, a general lack of support, either from a group or from a healthcare provider, can that lead to like physical and mental issues for a transgender individual?
Absolutely. I mean, dealing with being transgender and not pursuing what you need to pursue to make that happen, to become authentic, to be authentic to yourself, is causes so many problems to begin with, and then you get to the point where it's like you're willing to accept that, and then you're not able to get the care that you needed to make it happen. I'm a mental health professional myself, and I see the effects of trauma. I've seen the effects of trauma related to identity, and not being able to express that or live that truth. And it's devastating for people. And I think there's been more focus on this in the last few years, is the focus on total wellness, where your physical health and your mental health had traditionally been treated separately, but they're very, very integral to each other. A lot of times, where people are dealing with those traumas, they're also then dealing with more substance abuse and more depression, anxiety, more obesity, so it's very, very interrelated. And if doctors can understand that more, how our experience, our identity, and trying to suppress that causes these bigger health issues, I think maybe they'd be more willing to, open up to it and say, well, this is definitely a health crisis that we need to deal with.
I like I told you, I've been out in proud transgender female for about 4 years now, but during that time, I thank you. I didn't really have anyone to talk to except for my partner, and she was like my biggest cheerleader. But other than that, I just couldn't. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't find anything local. And just recently, because of the whole explosion with coronavirus and Zoom meetings, I'm one of my trans sisters from a online support group. She invited me to her support group online, and I went to it. And like for the first time, I was actually able to talk to a group of people who were in the same boat as me. After I was done, I felt so good about things. Like I am not alone. I really am not alone. And I think stuff like that is very, very helpful for those who do feel alone. What are your thoughts on that?
Improvements in technology, and just being able to connect to people in that way. Zoom has been amazing for people. They've been able to connect with groups of people rather than doing one-on-one, phone or messenger and things like that. It's so critical to be able to interact with people who are going through the same experience as you are. When I first started going to the group in Cleveland, the very first time, I just kept my mouth shut for the most part and listened. I was just in tears hearing people talk about my story, same things that I had been going through for decades. And it was just so eye-opening and so empowering to be there, to meet other people who had gone through the same thing I had. That was the first time I had ever actually interacted with another person who was trans. And it was just so eye-opening and so validating.
What advice can you give to a younger or older person around our age who wants to make that leap? They want to transition, they want to be happy. What advice can you give them to help them start their journey?
The biggest thing I can say is just know that you're okay. Know that there's nothing wrong with you. Know that, there are people out here who have your back. People who are going to support you and listen to you and help you on that journey. I always used to tell people, hey, if transition was easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of truth to that. It's challenging, but there are a lot of people out here who care, who want to help, who have access to the resources that can help, and don't give up. Just don't give up trying to be true to you. That's what life is all about. That is, to me, the meaning of life is this authenticity. You may have been born into a family, into a group of people, into certain circumstances, but that doesn't necessarily need to define you. You are born into this world as an individual with individual feelings and wants and experiences, and you have to rely on that. You have to be true to yourself, no matter how other people react to it.
Well, Caitlyn, thank you so much for being part of this discussion about the importance of support. I so appreciate your time. I know you're really busy. You got a lot of stuff going on today. So maybe we could talk again in the future about another subject if you're interested.
I'd love to.
That was awesome. I really, really love talking to Caitlyn. And sorry for the technical difficulties there. Don't exactly know what happened, but my stream cut off, and but I got it resurrected. So I hope you were able to see the whole video. A lot of the information she presented, I thought was very helpful. Uh, she gave me some insight into some of the healthcare issues that are out there. Now that was an edited segment of our interview. I picked the certain parts that I felt were good for this particular live show, but I'm going to upload the entire video in its entirety because she had a lot more things to say that you didn't hear in that little video snippet there. So I'll be uploading that probably within the next day, and I really hope that this was helpful to you because it's really important. I could just tell you from my own experience that even though I had my partner to help me, there were many times where I just felt like I was the only transgender female on the planet, okay? Because I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't have anyone that I could just relate to talk about the things that I was curious about or I didn't know. And, joining a transgender support group can be very helpful. And Caitlyn said something to the effect of, if you don't have it, build it. And a lot of people are like, well, how am I going to do that? It takes courage, and it takes a little bit of a leap of faith to do something like that. Now, in my community, instead of me starting like a support group myself, I thought it was best for me to talk about it on YouTube because I had so many stories to tell, and that was my way of reaching out to my community. And believe me, I've had a lot of great responses. I've met a lot of great individuals through this particular channel on Trans Odyssey, and I hope it keeps growing. I intend for it to keep growing and growing. I intend to have more guests on. Speaking of guests, I have a very special guest coming up next week, and I had a lot of fun with this interview. I had the opportunity to interview the Reverend Dr. Megan Rohrer. She is the first Lutheran pastor to be ordained in the United States, and she was on an episode of Queer Eye. If you're a fan of Queer Eye, you know who I'm talking about. And I have here a little snippet of my interview with Megan. Stand by.
Caitlyn Strohmeyer is a master-level social worker, community advocate, and a transgender woman living in northwestern Pennsylvania.
Now, I want to get straight to the point here. This is based on something that I was told. Is being transgender really against the will of God?
I think Jesus had more things to say about faithful people who had too many rules than he had time for anyone who was going to vote on who is in and who is out. When Jesus is resurrected and comes back into the world, the most common experience people have with this resurrected Jesus is they don't recognize his body.